Topspin serves. It seems like that's the fad these days. Everybody wants to hit a topspin serve, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. If you have watched all of my videos in this masterclass series to date, then you'll understand how to hit a serve, and mine has a little bit of topspin on there, but let's say we want to exaggerate that and have more and more topspin. Everything else I've talked about in the previous videos still applies. We still want to do all those components from where we're standing to where we're starting with our paddle to what our swing looks like. All of those things are still applicable if we want to hit this topspin serve. So what is different? So two minor differences off of everything else that I've talked about to date so far. The biggest one is, what's our paddle doing when it contacts this ball? And so as I started in a previous video and talked about, you can either have your paddle oriented like this or like this when you start your swing. Still doesn't matter. As I bring that paddle forward, then the biggest difference is I want this tip lagged behind. So as I might swing and this paddle would be here with the tip not lagged behind, what I want to have is my wrist cocked a little bit. So more and more like this as I'm hitting this ball. So what does that do? Well, first, so when do I cock my wrist or lag the tip of my paddle back? You can do it two ways. I had a video previously about how to hit topspin forehand drives. I'll put a link to that in the description box below. In general though, I view the topspin or the forehand drive and the serve is the same thing. The only difference is, for one of those, the serve, I'm holding the ball. The other one is somebody's hit the ball and it's coming at me. Other than that, the mechanics are almost identical. So the only difference, and in that video I talked about, as you are hitting this topspin forehand drive, as I start my paddle coming forward, I have a really loose grip, which lags the paddle tip back. And then once it gets lagged back like that, I kind of lock that in and squeeze it a little bit harder and then come up the back of the ball. For the serve, we can do that, or we could just start out with our wrist already cocked so that when I'm starting my swing, instead of having it like this or this, I've already got my wrist cocked back like this. Instead of what my serve would normally look like here or here, I've actually already got my wrist bent or angled off. And I can lock that in, or I can have my normal starting point, and as I start my swing with a really loose grip, the tip starts to lag behind, and then I lock that in as that comes forward. All right, if I want to put that topspin on the ball, what that means is, as my paddle swings through and hits this ball, it's going to hit the ball here, and my paddle's going to roll hard up the back of this ball. And so the more and more topspin I want on this, the harder I want to pull up the back of that ball. So as my paddle comes through, and I'll be sideways here, so I've got my wrist cocked back, and my paddle comes through here and contacts the ball, I want to pull hard up the back of that ball and think about the back of my wrist coming up. So what I'm trying to do is pull up on the back of my wrist, and that will force my paddle to roll up the back of this ball, and that's where that topspin comes from. If you want a heavy topspin serve, then you have to pull harder and harder up the back of that ball, meaning that I have to come harder and harder up the back of the ball. There's a couple of terms. One is rolling the ball, rolling some topspin, or brushing up the back of the ball. Not really what we want to do, because I don't think those words communicate what you really need to be doing. I have a younger daughter, so when she was younger, my wife would brush her hair. It wasn't really violent. It wasn't really quick through the hair. It was like, nice and easy and bringing the brush through the hair. That's not what we want to do to the contact point of the paddle and the ball, because we're not going to get much topspin out of that. So I think more in terms of brushing or rolling up the back of the ball is on one side of that extreme. The other one is to pull hard or to whip up the back of the ball. So a nice gentle roll or a nice gentle brush to get a little bit of topspin or a little bit of roll. That's not really what we're going to want. If we're going to want heavy topspin serve going the other way, we want to pull hard or whip up the back of the ball. So it's going to be more like that. And as I talked about swinging hard and getting more power, that's what we want to do as we hit this ball. is I'm still releasing this ball, having this ball as stationary as I can get it. But by the time I get here, what I want to do is start thinking about the back of my wrist and pulling hard or whipping up the back of that ball to get maximum top spin going across that net. The other slight change that we may have to do here is, in addition to how we're hitting this ball, is having this ball a little bit further out in front. So I talked about using my knee as a release point here to control this ball as I hit it over the net and managing the height up and down. If I'm going to pull hard up the back of this ball, it likely needs to be a little bit further out in front of me. So that as my paddle comes through and I'm pulling hard up the back of that ball, if it's too far back in here for more of a flat serve or a serve with a little bit of topspin, it's going to go into the net, most likely. So I'm probably going to want this ball a little bit further out in front, again using my knee as a reference point, so that by the time my paddle gets there and I pull hard up the back of that ball, it's out far enough in front that I get enough lift. And yes, I understand if we hit heavy topspin, it will arc the ball up and over and then make it dive on the other side. Sorry, I get that. But you may have to adjust your release point. And I said, if there's something you're going to be OCD about, it needs to be where we're releasing that ball when we let it go out of our hand. Another thing we need to be aware of is if we're going to spin the ball, whether that's side spin or back spin, slice, or top spin, those are more complicated shots. We're trying to do two things. One, we're trying to get horizontal speed on this ball. And the other thing is we're trying to get rotation. So it's not as simple as hitting a ball flat with little or no spin on it. And so it's more complicated. So we need to drill more. We need to practice more, which is why I've been saying you need to be practicing and drilling anyway. So what does that look like? So I've got this ball. So if I'm going to hit the ball flat with little or no spin, then this ruler, this yardstick, would represent the kind of the flight path of my paddle as it goes through this ball. So it would essentially be going straight through the middle of that ball. So from the backside all the way through the center and out the front, to just get all of the momentum off of that paddle going right through the middle of the ball. If we're going to topspin this ball, and let's say I'm serving in this direction, so the rotation would be, topspin would be this way as you look at it. My paddle path is no longer through the center of that ball. It's angling up from probably just below that equator up. And the more extreme that topspin I want to put on here, the more and more like this it's going to be. So you can see that now I'm trying to balance how hard does my paddle grip this paddle, how hard does this paddle grip my ball, this ball as it contacts that ball, versus how much rotation do I get. So the more severe the flight path of my paddle, so my paddle is coming up through here, up through this ball, then it's hitting this ball tangentially, meaning that it's not going through the center anymore. And so that's where that rotation comes from. So I'm off at this angle, and that's why that's a little bit more complicated. Grab my paddle here really quick. So what happens is I'm coming up here, getting this rotation on the ball. Instead of coming right through the ball, through the center, now I'm trying to pull hard up the back of this ball to get this rotation, to get it to go with topspin across that net. Another thing we want to be aware of is where's the contact point on this paddle when we're imparting topspin. It's going to be more critical because if my contact point with my paddle and the ball as they hit each other is off a little bit, it's going to impact the rotation and the flight of that ball more severely, because I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to hit it solidly enough to where it gets the speed that I want going that way, plus get all the rotation on it that I want when it goes that way. So let's say that the sweet spot of the paddle is here, right? So it's not very big on most paddles. In general, what I want to do is when I contact this ball with my paddle is contact above that sweet spot, roll all the way through as I'm contacting that ball, and have that ball come off toward the bottom or below that sweet spot a little bit. So as I contact this ball, so here I've released the ball, my paddle is coming forward, I want to contact that ball and paddle above that sweet spot just a little bit. And as I pull hard up the back of that ball, and this ball compresses on this paddle, which is hard for me to demonstrate, but if I'm off on my targeting a little bit, with this contact point. Let's say I'm way down here and my contact is at the bottom of or toward the tip of that sweet spot, and I'm rolling down here, then I've lost some of my rotation, I've lost some of my power. If I contact the ball too far up here and start my rotation, now this is a more dead spot of the paddle, so my flight's not going to be as good going that way. So what I want to do is be able to contact just above that sweet spot, pull hard up the back of that ball, and by the time that ball comes off the paddle, it's finished toward this end of the sweet spot, or maybe just a little bit below. So again, if you're going to be OCD about anything on the serve, where we're releasing this ball and where we're hitting this ball matters a lot. So if I'm going to topspin and pull heavy, I want to hit this ball a little bit higher on my paddle or more toward the butt or the handle. Pull hard up the back of that ball and then have that ball come off toward the tip end of that sweet spot. That was a lot. Bottom line is, if you're going to add any kind of spin, it's just going to complicate your shot. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying if you're going to do it and you want to be consistent, you need to go practice whatever that spin shot is, whether you're slicing or topspin or you're coming across sideways. You need to practice more of that. If you're going to do this in the serve, then start off with a little bit of topspin. And I talked about brushing versus pulling hard or whipping up the back of the ball. Start off with a gentle roll or brush up the back of that, and then increase that over time as you practice, as you drill every day, which you are, right? So we're out here every day and I'm a little bit more heavy topspin every day, and I'm trying to see more and more rotation on the ball. I talked in a previous video about marking your ball with some type of mark here. So a big black mark on here. This one's worn off a little bit. But this is on here so I can see the ball rotation as it goes away or as it's coming toward me. So I try and mark my balls well so I can see that ball rotation coming in. And this would be important while you're practicing your topspin serve, because I want to look at that ball as it goes away and how much rotation did I get on it versus how much was I trying to get on it. And am I getting the amount of rotation that I want? I don't want to just see, did it dive on the other side and did it kick forward and stay low? I want to see those things. But I want to put that in context of, I should be able to predict what that's going to look like depending on how much rotation I can see on this ball as it goes away. So I want to hit that ball and have it start to go away and see this rotate as it goes away from me, and see this black spot as it comes around and around and around. And it's not always coming from high to low or straight up on this equator. It could be off on an angle. But I want to see the rotation on that ball. So if you have some practice balls, try and mark those better so you can see the rotation as it goes across that net, and that will help you determine how much topspin you're getting. This ball's not going to dive anymore, or the aerodynamics aren't going to be any better on it if it's not rotating very fast. So where the aerodynamics really come into play is, how fast is this ball rotating? How fast can I get this topspin on there and still control it? And it's a hard thing to do, so you need to go practice. As I mentioned earlier, I had a video on how to hit a topspin forehand drive, and I go over some of this in more detail in that video. I thought I would just point you to the link below, but the description box here, since this is a master class, has quite a few links in it, and to figure out which one I wanted you to go watch would be a little bit difficult to do. So I'm just going to plug that video in here. Stick around if you want to watch that video. Again, I think that the topspin forehand drive and the serve, topspin forehand serve, are essentially the same thing. A forehand drive and a flat serve are the same thing. A topspin forehand drive and a topspin serve are the same thing. The mechanics are roughly the same, except for we're trying to lag the tip of this paddle behind, and we're trying to pull hard up the back of that ball if we're trying to impart topspin. And our ball release, if we're hitting serves, probably needs to be a little bit further forward. And if we're hitting drives, same thing, we're probably contacting that ball a little bit further out in front as we're hitting these drives, because we want to pull hard up the back of that ball. Here's that other video. I'm going to be drilling the topspin forehand drive today, showing you what I think is an easier, more consistent way to hit it. Some people will tell you to hit this topspin forehand drive with this paddle way out to the side with some wristy action, like a windshield wiper action. You can do that. I think the timing has to be really good, and so you need to practice that. For instance, if I start my wrist action too soon, I've missed rotating that ball. If I start it too late, I've missed rotating that ball. And the timing just has to be so perfect to pull that off. Again, you can do it, you just need to practice. I'm going to show you an alternative, which is I'm having my paddle vertical, which I have on most of my shots, and I'm pulling hard up the back of that ball. I will tell you why I think that's more consistent. I'm also going to talk about paddle preparation and why I feel like that's key to be able to hit topspin drives well. I have 2 other videos where I talk about paddle preparation and having the paddle be very vertical, how to hit forehands in general. I'll put the links to those in the description box below. In my opinion, it's more difficult to hit a shot with spin on it than to hit a flat shot. The reason is, if I'm going to spin the ball, I'm trying to do 2 things. One, I'm trying to get speed on the ball to get it across the net. Second one is I'm trying to put rotation on that ball to get it across the net well. And it doesn't matter if it's top spin or back spin or side spin. Doing those 2 things is harder than just hitting the ball flat and trying to get speed on it to get it across that net. So you can spin balls, a lot of people do, it just takes more practice to understand it's a little bit more difficult to do, and that's why we need to practice. So I'll talk about the mechanics of putting topspin on this drive. I'm in my ready position, ball's coming at me, I get prepped, and now as soon as I start my forward swing, I have a really loose grip. So my hand starts forward, but because my grip is so loose, the tip of that paddle starts to lag behind. Once it gets in that position, I tighten my grip just a little bit, and now I start my forward swing, and I'm concentrating on the back of my wrist here, and I want to pull this forward and up, and I'm pulling hard up the back of that ball, and that's where that derives that topspin. I'll show you the same thing facing the camera. Ball comes at me, I get my paddle prepped. As I start my swing forward, I have a really loose grip. My hand starts to come forward, and the tip of that paddle lags behind. As soon as I get that tip lagged behind, I lock and squeeze my grip a little bit harder, and I start pulling forward. I'm focusing on the back of my wrist, and I want my wrist to come forward and up, and I'm going to pull hard with the back of my wrist and come up hard up the back of that ball. The harder I pull up the back of that ball, the more topspin I get on that ball. So I think of topspin in 2 kind of forms. One is a roll, where I'm kind of brushing up the back, and you will hear people talk about brushing up the back of the ball to impart spin. That's one way to do it, but you're not going to get a ton of topspin that way. The other way is a whip, where I'm whipping the paddle up the back of the ball, and that's a more severe rotation, a heavy rotation. Obviously harder to hit. The harder we swing, the easier things get out of control. So start off practicing a topspin roll, where we're just kind of coming up gently up the back of this ball and trying to get used to this mechanics, where I'm coming gently up the back of the ball, then increase the pace, and we're going to whip up the back of this ball. I'm going to pull hard with the back of my wrist up the back of this ball, and that's going to impart way more topspin. So you can tell I don't have this windshield wiper action going on here. It's a straight pull up the back of this ball, and so since I don't have this compact windshield wiper motion where my timing has to be really good, if I'm doing this, I have a bigger hitting box that wherever this ball is, out here, my paddle orientation is the same, and so I don't have to time that as well because I don't have this wristy motion going on. I've already locked in my wrist at this angle. I'm trying to maintain that angle all the way through that swing and pull hard up the back of that ball. I mentioned earlier that hitting any kind of spin is more difficult because we're trying to do 2 things. One is I'm trying to get horizontal speed across that net. I'm also trying to get some type of rotation on that ball as it crosses the net. So it's a bit of a balancing act. If you think about this, then if I get too much contact with this ball, then I've got too much pace on it, and that ball's likely to go long or go faster than I wanted it to go. Conversely, if I only get a ton of rotation so my paddle doesn't grab that ball well, but it rotates it a ton, it may have a lot of spin but never make it across that net. So it's a balancing act between how hard does my paddle grab that ball for forward speed and how hard do I pull up the back of that ball to get rotational speed, and I have to balance those 2, and so it's a more difficult shot, and that's why we need to practice. That's enough talking. Let's go hit some balls. Here we go. So I'm not loose grip until the tip of my paddle lags back, then I'm going to lock that angle in, and then I'm just going to swing forward, pulling hard up the back of that ball. I'm not trying to brush up the back of that ball. I'm trying to pull hard up the back of that ball. And if I can do that, then I impart more topspin. Ball dives on the other side and it kicks forward after it lands. Trying to get my left hand out by this ball so I know where this ball is and where I need to be to go hit that ball well. Like everything else, my non-paddle hand matters. The better I know where that ball is, the better I can hit this ball. Trying to get my paddle prepped and early back. By the time this ball bounces, it's always in that same starting spot, meaning that my swing forward is more consistent because I'm always starting from the same location. Still breathing, gonna exhale every time I hit, gonna have a good follow through, paddle going toward that target I'm trying to hit at. Gonna breathe so I can slow this down and roll a gentler topspin. I still get some action on that. Not quite as much because the ball's not rotating as fast. But if I want to slow this down, and maybe this is where you are when you start this drill, and then I can speed that up. So the harder I swing, the more things get out of control. Timing is a little bit different. Harder I'm going to swing, the longer I have to wait because my paddle gets to that ideal hitting point earlier, the harder I swing. I missed that one. But there's no windshield wiper action here, so my timing doesn't have to be as good. And you can tell these balls are still going across pretty fast. They have a ton of spin on them, but if I'm gonna do this windshield wiper action, you can do that. This just makes life a little bit harder, and I'm not really about making life hard on myself. Breaking news, you may be thinking, hey, I could use that for my serve. And yes, you can. If I can find a mechanic that is more consistent, then I'm all for that. So swinging with this paddle vertical, thinking about the back of this wrist. Once that paddle tip gets lagged behind, thinking about back of this wrist, pulling hard up the back of the ball. I'm not trying to brush up the back. If I'm trying to put this much top spin on it, kind of the wrong word, I think, to think about, and words matter. So if I want to drive this ball hard and put a bunch of top spin on it, brushing is not what I want to do. I want to pull hard up the back of that ball. So if you're going to do that, start off not swinging so hard and get this mechanics down about keeping this paddle vertical, loose grip, lag that tip behind. As I swing forward, I'm thinking about the back of this wrist, pulling hard up the back of that ball. I'm not trying to brush up the back of that ball. I'm trying to pull hard up the back of the ball. Lets me swing harder, get more rotation on that ball, going the other way. Start off easier, like I did kind of in the middle of that set. Not gonna swing so hard, but I'm still pulling up the back of that ball. And so in those easier shots I was hitting in the middle, that's more brushing up the back of the ball. That I would agree with. I'm just trying to get some topspin roll on it. The other one's the first half. First part and the last part, to me, is more of a whip. I'm trying to whip up the back of that ball. I'm trying to hit and pull hard up the back of that ball, get as much rotation on it as I can. Still, it's a difficult thing to do. Timing has to be better, but not as good as when I'm doing this, because this is a much more compact motion. You could probably see as I'm swinging, my paddle's all through here, and there's a bigger box in here that I can hit that ball well in because my paddle is on the same motion. It's on that same path going through that bigger box, meaning my margin for error is bigger. Is that right, or smaller? Yeah, no, it's bigger. So I've got more leeway to hit that ball if my timing is off a little bit. If I'm doing this with this windshield wiper, you can tell very compact, and my hitting box is very small. You can do it. It just takes a little bit more practice. Hope you found that helpful. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Thanks.